All right, let's jump right in. We're not just talking about the history of some government building here. No, this is something much bigger. This is the story of a nation's memory. A wild 400-year journey of survival, chaos, and rebirth that really gets to the heart of the Philippines itself.
I mean, when we say Odyssey, we really mean it. The story of the National Archives of the Philippines is just epic. Think about it. It starts out as just a tool for a faraway empire, then it gets handed off between colonizers, somehow makes it through a world war, and then, finally, it becomes the guardian of a national story. Its history is the country's history, plain and simple.
And this is exactly why we need to talk about this. You know, it's so easy to think of archives as just dusty old papers, right? But they're not. They are the bedrock of truth. Seriously, they're the evidence that holds governments accountable, the documents that prove who we are, and really, the raw material of history itself.
So that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? How on earth does a nation's memory survive centuries of war, colonization, and disaster? How did this collection make it through all of that? Well, the answer is one heck of a story about resilience and transformation.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. We're going way back to the 16th century. When Spain set up shop, keeping records had nothing to do with preserving Filipino culture. Not at all. It was all about control. It was a blueprint for how to manage a huge colony from halfway across the planet. And you can really see how this whole system grew over time. It all kicks off in 1565 with Legazpi, just basic administrative papers. Then, boom, 1583, the real Audiencia comes along, and suddenly there's this massive pile of formal legal records. But what's really wild is that it takes until 1800 before anyone even tries to formally inventory all this stuff. It was a really slow, piecemeal process. So at the end of the day, every single royal decree, every court case, every tax report, it all boiled down to one thing: making sure the Spanish crown could run its colony effectively and, make a profit. These records were literally the eyes and ears of the empire. All right, now let's fast forward to the turn of the 20th century. A new player enters the game, the United States. They take over, and they inherit this gigantic collection of Spanish records, and they see a totally different kind of potential in them. And this was a huge moment. The Treaty of Paris in 1898, it wasn't just about handing over land. It was about handing over information. Suddenly, the Americans had their hands on more than 300 years of detailed records about the land, the people, the economy, everything they needed to know about their new colony.
And this quote just nails the American perspective. The archive became the workhorse of every administration. They didn't see it as some historical curiosity to be put in a museum. No way. For them, it was a practical, powerful tool. It was the engine they were going to use to build their government, sort out land disputes, and kickstart a modern economy. But man, this was a really unstable time for the archives. It was constantly getting shuffled around between different government departments. I mean, look at this. From the Executive Bureau to the Library and Museum, then the National Library, then the Bureau of Records Management. This wasn't just red tape. It was a sign that nobody could agree on what the archives was. Was it a tool? Was it a cultural treasure? Was it a library? They just couldn't decide.
And that brings us to probably the most dramatic part of this entire story. Because in the middle of the 20th century, the big question wasn't about where the archives belonged in the bureaucracy anymore. It was about whether it would even survive. At all.
Just listen to this quote. Records are on brown paper bags, on the back of letters, sales receipts, even evaporated milk can labels. Can you even imagine? This just paints such a powerful picture of the sheer desperation during World War II. With no paper, people were using literally anything they could get their hands on. This wasn't about filing forms anymore. This was about holding on to a tiny piece of civilization in the middle of absolute chaos. So after all that chaos, after surviving the war, we get to a major turning point. In 1987, the government makes this huge shift. The archives are officially reclassified as a cultural agency. This was a massive deal. It was a formal declaration saying, hey, these records aren't just paperwork anymore. This is our national heritage. This is our cultural memory. And that redefinition really paved the way for the final chapter in our story so far, the birth of the modern National Archives and its giant leap into the 21st century. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but it actually took until 2007 for this institution to get the permanent, clear identity it had needed for so long. Republic Act 9470 was that landmark law. It formally created the National Archives of the Philippines, the NAP, and gave it a really strong mandate to protect the nation's records once and for all.
And the sheer scale of that job is, well, it's staggering. We are talking about 60 million cataloged public documents. 60 million. That's everything from fragile Spanish-era manuscripts to the government records being created right now. It is an absolutely immense collection.
So how do you protect a collection that massive? Well, the NAP is leading a super critical shift. Just look at the difference here. The old way, paper, was a disaster waiting to happen. It was vulnerable to fire, floods, bugs, you name it. And finding one specific document? Forget about it. But now, with electronic records management, it's a whole new ballgame. It's efficient, it's accessible, and most importantly, it's about disaster-proofing our national memory for generations to come.
Okay, so we've been on this 400-year journey, which leads to the big question. Why does any of this matter to you and me today? Why should we care about the story of an archive?
Well, because the National Archives does way more than just store old paper. It holds the birth certificates of our towns and provinces. It holds the records that prove we are who we say we are, our rights, our identities. It's got the evidence we need to hold our leaders accountable. And maybe most important of all, it protects the raw, unfiltered, centuries-long story of the Filipino people.
So I want to leave you with this one final thought. If an archive really is a nation's memory, what happens when that memory is lost? What happens when a country forgets who it is? The whole point of the National Archives mission is to make sure we never, ever have to find out the answer to that question. Hey, if you found this explainer helpful or inspiring, entertaining, and informative, we'd love it if you'd share, like, and subscribe. Keep an eye out for the next upload. Thanks so much for watching.